Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Going to wait for some more of you to come in and we'll get started. Well, thank you all for joining at 11:30 in the morning on a Thursday for this conversation with Ashley Akers, a former January 6th prosecutor who resigned from the Department of Justice after they disbanded her unit in the wake of the second Trump administration. I just want to start out broadly with her to Ashley, if you can just tell us your story and the kind of cases that you prosecuted and what went into your decision.
Sure, I'd love to. And thanks so much for having me here, Adam. So, as Adam mentioned, for about 3 years, a little over 3 years, I prosecuted the people who partook in the Capitol riot on January 6th, 2021. During that time, I was charged with prosecuting some of the most violent rioters of the day and people who entered not only the Capitol building, but also the Senate floor where the actual vote was taking place and where the constitutional process of the peaceful transition of power was supposed to be taking place. And so I saw and was able to participate in over a dozen trials. I prosecuted dozens and dozens of cases. And I did it because, and the American public, I'm sure, is sick of hearing about January 6th to some extent, but I did it because that day was such an affront to our democracy. Politics aside, you can't have a group of people overtake an entire branch of government and stop that constitutional process. That's not the recourse that our Constitution sets forth. It's not recourse at all. And so I did that for, like I said, over 3 years. I did it up until the day, January 20th, during the inauguration when all of the rioters were pardoned in the president's blanket pardon. And I left the department a couple days after that.
Can you describe your reaction to that? I know that before that happened, folks were anticipating that there would be some sort of pardon. Learning that it was a blanket pardon, that everyone, the violent rioters, everyone had been pardoned. What was your reaction?
I mean, frankly, I was shocked. Like you said, Adam, I think we all anticipated some level of pardoning based on the discussions and sort of the political campaigning during the election season. I had no idea, no conception that the people who I prosecuted, who were convicted of 7, 8, 9 violent assaults against police officers, many with deadly or dangerous weapons, many who left police officers permanently injured. I had no conception that those people could be pardoned. I mean, of course they could, but what would the reason for that be, right? And so, sure, we anticipated some sort of, political outreach here from the president, maybe the people convicted of misdemeanors, for example. But it frankly was shocking to me. I woke up the next morning and was receiving dozens of calls from uh, police officers, from family members, from witnesses who testified in the trials who were similarly shocked and scared and upset at the pardons. And I continued to be shocked and upset and scared at it because it was a major sort of bash on the rule of law, and it's something that we've seen continue since January 20th.
We'll talk about the fear and the reasons for that fear soon, but if you could just specify, I covered a lot of these January 6th cases, and I know how many different weapons were used to attack police officers. What were some of the ones that you saw on your docket?
Sure. It ranges, Adam. We have bear spray, which is 10 times more potent than just typical pepper spray that was used at point blank ranges of less than a foot. I had a table leg from a broken table with protruding nails. I had a metal baseball bat defendant, a hammer defendant, homemade shield with like pokey sort of things. And then there were all sorts of construction equipment that was on the inaugural stage that was being constructed that was utilized as weapons against police officers, metal poles, for example. The list is really long. I gave a presentation a couple weeks ago and listed out all of the different weapons that we had charged, and it was over 100 different types of not only traditional weapons. I mean, there were guns at the Capitol on January 6th, but also homemade things that people brought. People used batteries to throw at police officers, even flagpoles. I prosecuted a defendant who hit a police officer with a flagpole in the chest and caused him to fall down several stairs and permanently injure his back. And so the list is really it's so long, and it's just so horrible to think about, that, not only that happened, but that it was now celebrated by this administration, and that these people are now not serving a consequence for their actions.
And doesn't that send a message that political violence is okay if it's done on behalf of Trump?
I mean, certainly. And that's the problem with the pardons, right? It's that you can do these things, you can take arms against police officers, against the Capitol building, against the institution, and it's okay so long as it's done in the name of the correct political affiliation. And that's the problem with these pardons, right? It's like every president has exercised their pardon power, but to do so in a way that doesn't condemn political violence is really shocking. Like, we have to condemn political violence. Otherwise, what sort of community and society do we live in? You could imagine the corollary. Imagine if a president pardoned the person who shot at President Trump. I mean, it's crazy to think about. These people were exercising that same level of violence, a lot of times with the same intent against police officers and in search of Congress members. And they've now been told that what they were doing was not only right, but they've been deemed as heroes, political heroes. And it's scary. I mean, there's no defense of it, in my opinion.
Right. And just to kind of pivot to the journey that led you down, you're now working with Speak Up for Justice, dedicated to protecting judicial independence and the rule of law. Talk about the work you've been doing with them and your current initiative about a provision that's currently in the budget bill that Elon Musk calls a disgusting abomination.
Sure. So I'll start with talking about Speak Up for Justice in case your viewers aren't familiar with it. It's a movement that is not only for attorneys and judges and lawyers, law students, but just for people to voice support for the judiciary. The judiciary is the only, non-political branch of government. So we have obviously the executive and the legislative branch. We hear about them all the time because they're political, they need to be elected, and so they're always in the news, they're always talking. The judiciary sort of operates in its own sphere, and just we don't think about it very often. Recently, the judiciary has really been under attack. We've had not only the administration, but other public officials calling for the impeachment of judges when they disagree with the judges' rulings. Not only calling the names, but really invigorating people to take violent actions against them, posting, for example, judges' family members' pictures on the internet, things like that. And so, in response to this unprecedented attack on the judiciary, Speak Up for Justice really seeks to voice support for the judiciary, to remind people that the courts are really the keepers of our constitutional rights, and it's so important and critical that our courts are able to operate independently without fear of political retribution. And so the organization's purpose is really just to encourage people to support the judges, whether you like their ruling or not, and to really condemn the attacks on the judiciary. And one of the ways or reasons that we're so focused on this right now is, as you mentioned, Adam, the current, I believe, House passed budget bill has a provision in it that would essentially limit courts' authority to enforce their orders. And so the only real ability courts have to enforce their orders is to hold people in contempt. So if a judge says, Adam, you owe child support in the form of $100, and you say, I'm not paying, the court can throw you in prison. And so to take your liberty not only forces you, but really incentivizes you and others to follow court orders, right? And the bill seeks to eliminate the court's ability to enforce contempt proceedings unless the plaintiff posts a bond, which historically just hasn't been necessary and hasn't been the case. And so this is one way, this budget provision, to limit courts' ability to operate as a co-equal branch. And so it's something that the Speak Up for Justice movement is really focused on. And it's really critical that people know that this is being talked about.
And of course, there are a number of potential contempt proceedings and enforcement proceedings against the Trump administration. For one judge, Judge Boasberg, found the Trump administration, there was probable cause to believe they violated his ruling regarding the Venezuelan immigrants. Just talking about Judge Boasberg, just yesterday, he issued a magisterial decision in that case, finding that the men in a prison in El Salvador do deserve habeas corpus proceedings, that they should have access and the government must facilitate that. In that ruling, he also ordered a $1 bond to preserve that variability that you spoke about. Do you see judges adapting to this threat?
I mean, I hope so. And, the judiciary, they're the smartest people in our country. They're all academics. That's why they're on the courts. So I hope that judges start to do this to protect their ability to have an enforcement mechanism in the contempt. A couple problems with that, though, Adam. The bill, as currently written, would retroactively void past orders. So any past order that a court has entered, say, a company was polluting a river, for example, and a court ordered, company, stop polluting the river. You're making the drinking water for the community unsafe. The company has to follow that because otherwise they risk being hauled into prison. Under the current budget order, whatever bill, all retroactive orders are now void. And so even if courts are savvy enough going forward, like Judge Boasberg was, to put that nominal $1 bond, it doesn't actually take care of sort of the destabilization of all past cases. And if you can imagine, our judicial system is really based on court orders that are followed. And if we suddenly say everything in the past, all these injunctions or court orders suddenly don't have to be followed because the judges didn't know they needed to have this nominal $1 bond, that's really destabilizing for the courts. So sure, they can hopefully address it going forward. I'm sure there will be challenges to that because $1 is not really a meaningful bond. I'm sure there will be discussion about that. But I am glad to see and not surprised that it's Judge Boasberg who's the one thinking of how to get ahead of this threat to the judiciary.
Right. And of course, if the Senate passes it and it's not a fait accompli, that would retroactively, as you put it, Ashley, end all of the potential enforcement and contempt proceedings that are currently active against the Trump administration. One imagines that was the point of why the House GOP put it in there. Going back to another pardon that's being floated and discussed, it's the Gretchen Whitmer plot, the people who plotted to kidnap and assassinate Gretchen Whitmer. What's your reaction to that, having covered so many cases about political violence?
Sure. I on the same level, but perhaps more extreme, I find it just egregious. Thinking about January 6th and the people who were violently attacking police officers who are pardoned and told like you're totally fine. Now we have someone who tried to, as you put it, kidnap and assassinate a governor, a leader of one of our states, and even the idea that it's being sort of passed around as to whether these men should be pardoned, it's just horrible. I know I've repeated this already, but we have to condemn political violence regardless of political affiliation. There should be no room for political violence in our country. And, to have a democracy that says, as long as you commit political violence against the opposing party, you're going to be good. That's dangerous from just a democratic rule of law perspective. And it's a really dangerous precedent to set. We hear about third world countries or other countries where there are assassinations of political leaders or political opponents. We don't want to be there. And so now is the time when we're sort of seeing this extension of the executive power and seeing the executive branch sort of figure out how far they can go. And now is the time for people to really be speaking and talking about it, because the rule of law is important for everyone. The Governor Whitmer case might not affect any of us personally, but we also have rights, and we want to have democratically elected leaders that are elected based on our vote and not based on any sort of like political violence or political like outrage against the other party.
Right. And if Trump does go through with this pardon, it would send a very loud message that certain forms of political violence are acceptable. There's a thing that you said earlier about Speak Up for Justice's mission that I wanted to return to. A few weeks ago, I spoke to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse in a similar Substack Live on All Rise News. He's investigating the threats against judges. And one of the most alarming ones that have been reported on are these so-called pizza doxings, where people have been sent pizzas. The judges have been sent pizzas in the name of the murdered son of a federal judge. It sends two messages. One message, I know where you live. And the second message cannot be read in any way but a death threat. Uh, have you been surprised by the fact that there isn't a criminal case out of any of these alarming incidents that have been reported now for months?
Absolutely. And I will say, we often, I used to be a prosecutor. The public often doesn't know of an investigation until they know of it, right? And so perhaps there is one. The FBI and our law enforcement partners, they often operate covertly while they're investigating. I hope there is one. It's so scary and just unacceptable that our federal judiciary can be targeted like this in such a threatening and direct manner. So I have to believe, because I do believe in the rule of law in our country, that this is being taken seriously, and I hope that it's just still behind closed doors. There's no justification for not pursuing this vigorously. And, we've seen sort of a major shift in the resources of the federal government lately. We've seen agents at the FBI, CBP, Homeland Security sort of having shifted from like domestic terrorism, for example, or violent crime towards the immigration enforcement. And so I know there's a serious lack of resources right now for things just like this. I just have to hope to believe that federal law enforcement is taking this seriously. In my experience working for the Department of Justice for the last 7 years, the law enforcement partners have always taken judicial security very seriously, and I really hope that they're doing that now. I'll just note also, these, pizza deliveries, it's horrific. Like you said, it sends two very strong messages. This was happening towards prosecutors who were working on things like the Trump prosecution and the January 6th prosecutions too. And so it's really important that our law enforcement partners, agencies, take this seriously, because when does it stop and where does it stop? And if we're allowing people to do this without any sort of consequence, you're sort of turning a blind eye. And, like I've said again, we have to condemn political violence, regardless of political affiliation, and certainly when you're a branch of government that is charged with upholding the rule of law.
It's an important point you just made about the fact that a lot of these investigations tend to be confidential. Isn't one of the tragedies of our current moment that there's even a question that will law enforcement investigate death threats against judges? Because we do have an administration that is pardoning people engaged in political violence, political threats. Isn't that one of the tragedies? And isn't some of the work that you're doing with Speak Up for Justice, excuse me, uh, basically providing a forum to demand that accountability given the questions we all have?
Absolutely. I think, Adam, it's unacceptable if the federal government and law enforcement agencies are not investigating this, and the public should think it's unacceptable. And so you're right. Speak Up for Justice is really just calling all people together so that we're all thinking about these issues. We're all voicing public support or public opposition when we hear about the things like the potential pardoning of the Governor Whitmer's attempted assassinators. And so, yeah, I encourage all of your listeners to really, Google Speak Up for Justice, sort of follow the commentary that we're having. We're trying to put out a lot of material for people and give people different voices to listen to, things to think about, to ensure that, we don't get to a place that we don't want to be and it's a little too late. We can't live in a society where judges are actually being murdered for what they rule based on law and fact, right? And so we're getting close, though, right? Because if you're getting pizza deliveries to your house, that means there are people who feel comfortable enough in our current society to openly threaten judges. So that has to be unacceptable by the American people.
Mm. I want to talk a little bit about your decision, how it might relate to viewers who are watching now. The federal government employs roughly 3 million people. So a lot of people working for this administration, hardworking people doing their jobs who may be career officials, work for the government for decades, might be deciding right now, what do I do? Can I do my job in this environment? In your case, it was a very extreme example because the Trump administration had disbanded the team and opened up as you put it, a wild goose chase inquiry against you. But what about other folks in the government? What's your advice for people weighing that difficult decision? Do I stay or do I go?
Sure, it's a hard one. I need to encourage all the good, you know, rule of law focused people to stay because we need them. But it's one of those things, Adam, where on one hand, it's hard to be in a system and to be working for people who, one, are not supporting you, and two, who you feel like might ask you to do something that's against your ethics or morals, or just against your duties to the Constitution and as an officer to the court. And what we're seeing right now is we've seen many lawyers who are federal government prosecutors or trial attorneys get fired for what they say in court. And it's a really difficult position to be in when you've sworn a duty to uphold the Constitution. You also have a duty to be an officer of the court and to tell the truth. And then you're getting this backside pressure from your boss or your boss's boss to say something. And it's sort of an impossible or untenable position for people to be in. Anyone who's in a position like that, I mean, needs to think seriously about whether it's worth it. But like I said, on the same token, it's really important that we have good people who believe in the Constitution, who believe in the rule of law, who support the judiciary and can vigorously advocate in court, but then respect a judge's ruling. It's so critical that those people stay in the government. And it's not just lawyers, right? It's all government employees. We need people, career government employees who have the institutional knowledge of whatever agency they work for, who are the subject matter experts. Our society needs you. But now more than ever, I can see why people are sort of making that shift. And a lot of people are doing really great things and sort of coming out of the administration or out of the agency and then still utilizing their subject matter expertise, but for a nonprofit or at a law firm who can sue the government, sort of like shifting that. And so I don't have any advice other than to, stay true to who people are and just remember that it's never worth it to risk, your morals or your reputation to say or to do something that you don't believe in. And I say that knowing people need jobs and have mortgages and kids and need a paycheck. So it's a difficult discussion to have, but the Speak Up for Justice movement, there's several other organizations that are providing support for federal government workers. And so I just encourage people to sort of do that, reach out. And I think there's a huge community of people willing to support federal government employees right now.
Mm. And to the good career government employees with integrity who remain in the Department of Justice, what are they thinking right now? How do they operate in this government, in this administration, with this leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends and former colleagues who, I mean, frankly, are like terrified every day. It's like, will we be fired today? Will we be riffed? Will my agency be cut? Will I have to go to the border tomorrow? I said this before, and I think if the goal of the administration is to make the government more efficient and operate better, it's sort of having the opposite effect because you have these workers who are terrified, who are stressed out all the time, who don't know what's next, who have no job stability, who are now being asked to, write essays about how they are doing work in support of this administration specifically and its goals, even though they've, proven their effectiveness over the course of years. And so it's just difficult, Adam. And I really applaud the people who are doing it right now.
Uh, I always end interviews for All Rise News with a question that's kind of about our editorial mission, which is civic engagement. And folks who have been watching this interview and have been wondering how they could get involved in standing up and speaking up for justice and for defending judges and for demanding accountability for those who threaten judges and prosecutors for their work. What can they do right now?
Sure. I'll give one practical and then one sort of, depending on your circumstances. I think, just the general rhetoric that we have in our country. There's always court cases that some people don't disagree or don't agree with, right? The Supreme Court strikes down whatever, the Supreme Court does this. It's just important that we think about what we say and rather than attacking judges, because we've all done it like, how could this justice do that? This is all political. Just really try not to do that and just try to think like the judges are protecting our rights, our right to speak freely, to vote, to worship, to get a fair trial. That's their job. And just because they don't always issue opinions that we agree with doesn't mean we should just bash them immediately, even if you don't agree with the opinion. And so, just in our daily conversations with each other, really being conscious about not attacking the institution of the judiciary is something we all could be better at. And then I'm a big I have a big involvement in the Federal Bar Association. It's an association for lawyers and who practice in federal courts before federal judges. But we do outreach all over the country, civics engagement, for example. We have judges across the country who invite elementary schools into their courthouse to show them about a trial, things like that. So I encourage all of your listeners, you could Google Federal Bar Association. There are events that we have all the time. There are webinars. Even if you're not a lawyer, you can really start to learn about how important it is that we support the courts and just educating ourselves and then talking to our friends and family, I think can go a long way.
One thing I always tell folks, I've been a legal journalist for nearly 2 decades now, and I've seen some very historic cases, and everyone watching right now can watch those historic cases too. You could have watched Donald Trump, for example, be convicted of 34 felonies if you were in New York at the time and got on the line early enough. I highly recommend just watching court proceedings. We list them all the time on All Rise News in a column called Rising This Week with instructions about how to attend one very easy way to engage civically. And sometimes it's just fun to watch. I want to thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us. For all of the folks who joined, thank you for joining. And we are going to post if you joined late, don't worry about it. If you are just joining now and you missed a lot of the interview, don't worry about it. We're going to post the entire thing on allrisenews.com. If you subscribe, you'll get it right in your inbox as soon as it's posted, and you can watch the whole thing if you missed it. Thank you once again, Ashley.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone.